Okay, cool. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you to this inaugural program that we've captioned as Author Spotlight, which is designed basically to showcase the work of Africanist scholars that are working in the area of African studies on the continent, both those in the on the continent and those also that are based in the diaspora. And the idea is for us to also, complement the effort at studying our own stories as Africans from our own unique perspective. So we have the pleasure of having a very well-respected Africanist scholar by my own reckoning, a very good friend, Dr. Mickey Costa, who teaches at the University of Texas, Department of History. She'll be talking on her book, which discusses the power of the oath, as we have speculated. And another great Africanist scholar who is the chair of African Studies at the University of Central Arkansas, Dr. Michael, would help us in engaging with her and also coordinate our own engagement with Michael Mwenda, I think. I hope I pronounced it correctly. He will be helping us to discuss the book and also coordinate the question and answer session for the program. But just to give a bit of introduction on what we are discussing today, we'll look at oath as something that's indigenous in Africa when it comes to taking key decisions. One of the things that spurred our interest in discussing this at this time was also the emergence or the reinvention of the word oath, with the recent events in the US. We have people who are part of the groups that invaded the Capitol that call themselves the Oath Takers. And if you look them up, basically, you also look at how they are interpreting, the oath. This group basically consists of people who have been servicemen, who have sworn allegiance to the country, to protect the country. So you have the military, you have the police, you have the first responders. And I looked up their motto, which is something not on our watch, which basically, explores the basic Roman concept of custodial re publicae, those who are guiding the republic. And I just pose this question for us to stimulate our thought, to say there are layers of being guidance in the world today. And I refer us to a Roman poet by the name Juvenal, who also poses the question, quis custodiae ipso custodes? Who will guard the guardian? So there are layers of guardianship, there are layers of protection in the world today. Now, not to preempt what the discussion is going to be all about, let me just hand over there's no mic here, but the screen to Dr. Mickey Costa, sorry, to help us, spearhead the discussion. Dr. Costa, please. Yeah, Mickey, so the floor is up to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity to present and talk about the study entitled The Power of course, the book, The Power of the Oath. And I kind of added to this a little bit and said implications beyond challenges and opportunities. So can everyone see the slide okay?
It's good.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, so, interesting, I can't see parts of the slide. The first, I'd like to start with just kind of an overview about the book. So I'd like to just go through a couple of points here on the slide. There were many injustices leading up to the Mau Mau War. Under colonial rule in the 1940s, African pleas for political inclusion, failed promises, and went unanswered. Between the years of 1952 and 1960, thousands of African men and women vowed secrecy, unity, and allegiance to the abuse. Their oaths, acts, and new practices. The oath was invoked as a secret and feared power source used to seal the movement and to restore justice. The Mau Mau Oath was already invoked when on October 20th, 1952, the governor of the Kenyan colony declared a state of emergency. The oaths were already taken and the lines were already crossed. The foundation of the book, and this is something that I've been able to reflect on much later even, is on the belief that we can only tell our own complex Black power history for our understanding and knowledge. I was also, when I wrote this book, I was very careful to watch and avoid certain terms. And Philip, I'm laughing because I know we talked about this term witchcraft before, but I found that when I was doing some of this work, the historiography often uses it such a way where it undermines various knowledges. So this book, it reveals an unbelievable African people crossing ethnic lines, gender, religion, and locations, united through a secret or a series of white authority and rule in Kenya. It's a story of Black power, liberation, and freedom. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to just kind of give a nice, or try to give a nice overview of the argument, methodology, and approach, just in case you haven't had a chance to look at it, and also just to serve as a reminder of the attempt of the book. The book argues that despite ethnic level oath variances, and we can talk about that more if it comes up in the discussion, traditions, names, and ritual nuances, Mau Mau nationalism was forged across communities based on common beliefs of the power of the oath and shared Mau Mau objectives to fight British oppression, unifying individuals like members of the Kamba community with the larger Mau Mau struggle. I know this is a mouthful, but I wanted to make sure all of this kind of get out there and kind of discuss it because it's actually a complex system and argument here. Relying heavily on the voices, beliefs, imaginations, and memories of Kamba Mau Mau veterans, the study aims to show that there were indeed many different visions that merged during the Mau Mau to advertently forge nationalism. This study holds that the Kamba, although typically overlooked, fought in the Mau Mau War, shared the goals of restored land and freedom, but they also had, and this is through the research, their own ethnic level grievances and issues like destocking policies that impacted their lives. And finally, we should continue to question the historiography, this historiography in particular. Clearly, Kikuyu were the Mau Mau majority, but I argue, what about the stories of the minority groups that fought? The Mau Mau threads to these communities show the complexity and the appeal of the movement. So that's my central argument. Just to kind of talk a little bit about how I approached this. Today actually was going through what I did, and it was pretty long. I would spend too much time talking about the different phases, but it was two main phases of the research. But basically, the story is based on a reconceptualized Mau Mau history, and it's looking at this history based on oath rituals as the center or the window to interpret the spirit and conviction of in this case, the revolutionaries. So at the foundation of the story are the collected interviews, oath statements, acts, testimonies of hundreds of Mau Mau veterans from various locations in Kenya. The first phase focused primarily on the Kamba or Ukambani area, and the second phase of the research expanded out into other communities for comparative analysis. The work is based also on archived work. Mind archives from Kenya, London, collecting Mau Mau oaths, rituals, and court ordeals. I found a lot of information in a lot of the criminal cases because they just provided a wealth of detail in terms of the oath statements and dates and participants and so on, because they used the Mau Mau oath as a mean to decide executions and to convict these Mau Mau fighters. And finally, I designed and modeled a Mau Mau oath ritual. It's basically a model based on the historical evolution and contemporary oathing use. So I'm hoping that it can be flexible enough to maybe think about other ways to theorize and conceptualize oath rituals and the oath experience. And just as a side note, in case I don't get to say this later, the oath ritual was a complex, dynamic ceremony based on participants, statements, acts, types of oath, number of oaths, gender, location, and date. This is the central part of the model argument. And over time, oaths have become more and more radicalized. So this is just a quick map to show the research areas. If you see the parts that's in the gray area, can you see my pointing? I don't know if you can see my pointing. Anyway, there's a certain area, Kitui, Machakos, all of these areas. Actually, in the smaller map, you can see that was the first level, and then the second phase of the research expanded out to other communities within Kenya. Okay, I'm not going to have time to talk about this model, but if we do have time later and we want to discuss it, we can kind of look into it or think about it. One of the things that helped me really put together the complexity of oath rituals was to actually try to design it. And I kind of used my background in architecture to help me figure out a way to capture the complexity of what I saw was a system of changing parts and things. And, you know, in this case, you can see oath participants and locations and all of these different things that would actually go into the oathing experience. So, for example, you know, oath symbolism, you know, there's the use of banana leaves and, you know, rituals of times that you'll go around certain areas and whatnot. And all of these things meant and mean things to the oath administrators and the participants to evoke a level of power in terms of the ceremony and the candidates would share during that experience. So I just wanted to put this out, and we can talk a little bit more about the tools I use and whatnot. But this is what helped me basically try to describe something that I thought was very complex. And one of the other arguments that I like to make is that I think that as historians in particular, we've been challenged with how to model and theorize a lot of complex systems. And I think we need better, more effective tools in order to be able to tell the stories of some of these histories. Okay. So with that, I hope I'm doing okay on time. I had a few conclusions that I'd like to make. And then this is just the conclusions of, you know, overall, just the summary of the book. And then I think we're going to get into some discussions. I even have other slides later that we can talk through about some of the other newer threads to oath taking. So in conclusion, the oath in Kenya, and I would even argue beyond, continues to resurface over time. Oathing can offer insight into the uniting relationship between local, national, and international liberation struggles. I believe previous writers on the oath have not been able to address there was not a single Mau Mau oath. Each was unique in its design and setup. But at the same time, there were, as I show, many elements that were standard and common. The oath was a conditional system of very different components, variables, structures, relationships, and rules that actually changed over time. And part of what I argue is that it became more radical over time. This study aims to stimulate and offer new ways to conceptualize resistance, Mau Mau and the Mau Mau oathing experience that may be applied to perhaps even other freedom fights. And finally, by understanding this history, meaning, structure, symbolism, and power of oathing, we're able to discover a different version of the Mau Mau War, one that was united and empowered across ethnic lines, gender, religion, and age. And finally, the ultimate aim is to remember and restore the depth and breadth of the Kenyan past. Okay. These are some of the other implications. I think we can get into this perhaps a little later, but that's it. Okay, guys, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for the wonderful summary of the book. Also showing us the model which you used in describing this unique Kenya experience. So without much ado, let me just invite Dr. Mwenda Kitiji to lead the discussion.
Okay. Thank you so much, Philip, and the audience. And thank you, Mickey, for that.
Sure.
For that summary. So this book is powerful in many ways. For me, as an African scholar and you know, a Kenyan, you know, and someone who grew up around the place where Mau Mau was fought, and grew up hearing about the Mau Mau War. What you did by explaining the oath is something that you know, not many people have been able to talk about, because you know, the Mau Mau oath was very powerful, and you know, even after the war, you know, in the post-colonial period, people who went through the experience of the Mau Mau, you know, the participants, you know, those who were involved in the war in various ways, you know, there were many participants. There are, you know, it's not just those who are fighting in the forest, but there were informers, you know, those who are supplying the fighters in the forest with food. You know, all those people had taken the oath. So those of us, you know, who were born later on and grew up, you know, around these places, used to hear there was something called the oath, but you know, no one explained, you know, what that oath was, you know, and it was almost a taboo subject in many ways. It felt like, because you know, those who had taken the oath would not say what the oath was. It was just the oath. But by, you know, talking about this ritual, you know, the oath that, you know, sought to bind these freedom fighters together, you know, in what they wanted to achieve, you know, liberation from, you know, and restoration of their freedom. You know, it's a very significant addition to scholarship, because a lot of the Mau Mau scholarship is, you know, about the actual wars, you know, who killed who, you know, how people are captured and put in prison and hanged. But you're able to bring bring this other background information about actually what did it mean even to become a Mau Mau. So that's the power actually of the book. So one thing that you've raised, which is important to note, is that oathing, as a ritual practice, was common in pre-colonial Kenya, and I believe in pre-colonial Africa. It is through the ritual of the oath that people became members of their groups, right? So many people went through various forms of initiation, whether it's in age group, age grade, age sets. There were secret societies, there were religious societies everywhere, from West Africa to East Africa to Southern Africa. People, that initiation included, taking an oath of some kind, and that what made you become a member of that group. So what you see happening with later on in places like Kenya, where there was the Mau Mau War, but also in other places where Africans during the colonial period were fighting for liberation, is that they are using that pre-colonial practice of binding people into a group now to use that to bind them, fight the colonialists, right? So, so it is this pre-colonial practice that becomes very significant in the post-colonial period. I mean, in the colonial period, when Africans are seeking to challenge, this oppressive system that is controlling them. And now, the other significant thing about your book, you say during colonial period, Europeans, the British kind of did not care much about various rituals. Of course, they did not understand these rituals before the Mau Mau, So in the case of Kenya, they left Africans to continue practicing some of their cultures, although I would say that the church, in many places in Africa, especially in Kenya, the church did fight these oaths, these cultural practices, but the colonial administrators themselves, the British colonial administrators, did not actually care much about, Africans practicing their, traditions until Africans used those, practices to turn against the colonialists. So, so in Kenya, it's in the 1950s, early 1950s, that the British outlaws the taking of the oath because they realized that, that's how Africans are being recruited to fight them, right? So now they outlaw this practice, which they had turned their, which they did not care about previously. Now, so the other thing that you've brought up in your book is how the oath, because the British and the Europeans tried to cast an uprising like the Mau Mau as being atavistic, barbaric, tribal uprising, by savages, by tribal savages. So so basically, they were trying to cast the Mau Mau people as first of all, it's the British who tried to cast the Mau Mau uprising as just a Kikuyu affair, right? When, as you've clearly shown, there are other communities that participated, the Kamba, for instance, participated, the Meru, where I come from, were big participants in the war, the Embu and some other groups were involved in the fight against, in the Mau Mau revolution. But of course, the British tried to use their divide and rule tactics, by casting this uprising as being, an affair of a few disgruntled savages who are mostly Kikuyus. Now, what you do in this book is to show that actually the oath, this oath cut across ethnic boundaries, So when the British are trying to cast the Mau Mau oath as simply an affair of the Kikuyus, the reality is Africans of different groups actually use the same oath to bind themselves into being part of this group that was fighting for their liberation. So that is significant because it's proof that Africans, despite the challenges that were there to organize across the ethnic boundaries, because it was difficult during the colonial period to organize, across different ethnic groups. In Kenya, they had they actually did not allow, especially in the 1940s, they did not allow the formation of national political movements. They said if you want to form a political movement, it has to be tribal, right? So because they wanted Africans to just think of themselves as members of a tribe, not members of a nation, right? Of a colony. So despite those attempts by Europeans to divide them, you see Africans actually are able to use their pre-colonial practices to bind loyalty among all these disparate, different ethnic groups. And that's an important aspect that you bring out in your book. Of course, as I mentioned earlier on, one of the most fascinating things about the book for me is when you describe the oath. What did it? What was the architecture? What was the experience? What did the taking the oath involve? And as I said, that's something that people usually don't talk about, right? At least those who went through the practice. And
That's true.
Here you are able to to capture that. So that's something to me that's very fascinating to know, to get an idea of what is this oath, Of course, the other thing is gender. So the Mau Mau rebellion was not just an affair by men. It's not just men. It's also women. And women also take the oath, right? Women also take the oath. So, and women are important participants in this war because, they played a critical role as informants. They are the ones who are the spies. They were the ones who, collected information about, what Europeans were doing, what they were planning, and relaying that information to the Mau Mau who are fighting, right? So that's a very important role that women play. Actually, it's also women who are feeding the Mau Mau in the forest. Living in the forest fighting is not easy. When you're also being hunted by Europeans, in the forest. So it's women who took the risk. Yeah. And probably for those who are not familiar with the Mau Mau war, the British rounded up villagers in the hotspots of the war. They rounded them up and put them in these concentration camps, right? Where they police them. And, these villages that they put them in, these camps, they were very guarded. They dug trenches around those villages, they dug trenches and put spikes, you know, down on those trenches to make sure no one leaves, you know, those villages to go out unless you go through the main door, that is the main gate that is being guarded by the police. So still, despite all those efforts, these women who had taken the oath were able to get out of these villages, go find food, and go feed, you know, the fighters in the forests. So, so women play a critical role. Without them, there would be no Mau Mau, and so, you know, a lot of times in the Eurocentric ways of explaining Africa, you hear that Africans being cast as people who are not gender sensitive, who don't care about women, who are patriarchal, you know, in this, and you can clearly see in this case that that's not what happens. Now, there's a lot here to unpack, so I won't continue more going on and on about the book. But you know, one thing that I'd like to mention is that, you know, the oath has been a tool, you know, used by revolutionaries like the Mau Mau, but Philip and I think Mickey, you mentioned this earlier on. You know, recently we were treated to a theater that has never been seen in America for probably ever before. When you know, those people who tried to take over the Capitol building, you know, they stormed the Capitol, and part of those were people who are calling themselves oath. What are they calling themselves? Oath what? Oath takers? Oath. Huh?
The oath keepers. The oath keepers.
Yes, oath keepers. Yes. So, and many of these oath keepers, you know, are members of the, uniformed forces, the police, the military, and to them, they're claiming that they are keeping the oath that they took when they were, you know, when they became police or military officers. Now, what are these people trying to do? Yes, what are they? What? Yes, the oath to protect the Constitution. Now, what are they trying to do? These oath takers are not revolutionaries; they are counter-revolutionaries. These are people who are using the oath to maintain the status quo, you know, which, you know, from the grievances, for instance, that we heard for 4 years when Trump was president. You know, Trump kept on saying, you know, America is going down because it's being because there are these immigrants who are coming in, and you know, so on and so forth. So to them, they are trying to maintain, you know, the old order, when the old good days, you know, when America, you know, when the Trump was saying, make America great again, right? So when was this? When was the time that America was great? According to them, of course, it's the time when they oppressed everyone, when it's during the Jim Crow and the slavery, you know, when they were the dominant people who were in control of everyone and suppressing everyone. So basically, in this case, they are using the oath, you know, to kick out. I mean, to bring back the good old days when they were in control of everything. Now, today, I mean, in the case of Africa, in the case of the Mau Mau are using the oath to, you know, to cause a revolution, you know, so to kick out the oppressors, right? So you can see the tension there, you know, in Africa. The oath is being used, you know, to kick out the oppressors. In the US, the oath is being used to restore oppression, basically. So it's important to see how an oath can be, you know, used to achieve different different ends. So I think for now, I'll stop there. Philip, are we taking questions now, or what are we doing?
Yeah, I think we should start taking questions. Perhaps people who have questions can, since we are not very much in the room, people could raise their hands. Nobody has typed any question yet. But if you have questions, you can just signal. We'll see your hands raised, and we'll invite you to speak. Since we're just like closing there, so that it will be as interactive as possible. But if I could start, while people are preparing for for their own questions, what has been fascinating for me is the intersection between religion, different religions in terms of faith, and even as you have emphasized, basically the kind of political movement that we are having today. And so, if I could pose the question, perhaps both of you may have something to say about it. How relevant is this practice in terms of the current age, the 21st century, where we're in the age of vaccinations and COVID and all those stuff, digital age, So is oath taking new forms and dimensions instead of, like, for instance, blood oath, instead of using symbol in terms of symbolism, what kinds of manifestation are we having when it comes to people swearing allegiance to themselves? Do we still have those conventions being practiced, or do we have like an emergence of different reinvented practices of oath taking today? I don't know whether it makes some sense.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Mickey, did you want probably?
Okay, maybe can you summarize it then, someone?
So
I just want to make sure I could hear, because
yes.
there was a part where it kind of broke up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't hear.
So he's asking about oath taking in the present, right? So how has this practice evolved? Is it still practiced, and by who, and why?
Okay, got it. Okay, I can start if that's okay. I think it's part of what I argue also in the book is I try to, and I should have actually included this slide, but one of the slides, if you do have the book in chapter 2 on page 32, I actually did a diagram where I show over time how oaths have changed. And on the other side, I talk about how in some cases it radicalized. But what I noticed is that we have a level, or the first layer of pre-colonial, if you want to look at it that way, or oaths before, say, 1900 is better term. And then we have the oaths that took place around the 1950s. And then beyond, I think this is kind of getting to your question, is what types of oaths have we seen, not just in Kenya, but even perhaps beyond. So one of the things that it seems from my work is that we have different campaigns or even politicians that would actually use oaths to seal up their group's allegiance to their party, and so on. I know in 1969, there was a whole oathing campaign. His spot, his position, his politics, and he had different individuals come into a space where they did oathing rituals and whatnot. Beyond that, something that I found, aside from, okay, I like to talk about the hip hop artists a lot, because I did an article once, and I pretty much, they invoked Mau Mau in a lot of different ways that I almost felt that they were kind of creating the space for us to think about or reimagine oaths, or go back and think about these oaths that were taken to make sure that these oaths were being fulfilled and promised. So what I found is that through their music, through their lyrics and so on, they were actually invoking some level of that oathing spirit or commitment and unity with the young people. So that's the side note, but I do think that there are radical groups like Mungiki that use oathing rituals and whatnot to, again, remind us of, these cultural practices of the past and to, again, say fight for land and much in terms of how oathing has been used in, say, like the United States. But I think that that's, again, just an area for more research. I do recall during the Black Power era, and say the 1970s, that they also did their own pledges and oaths. And I really do believe that because of their influence that there was a level of connection between Kenya and the Kenyan fight, the revolutionaries there. And I do believe that some of these things were adopted in terms of trying to put together their commitments in ways that they can unify. And then, of course, I think that a lot of oath, because of the secret nature of the oathing rituals, people might not want you to openly know the oaths that they've taken or the unity that they have forged. I think Michael mentioned earlier the notion of secret societies and whatnot. So again, I think there's a lot more to explore and how this unity or these rituals can actually be a powerful source and a force, depending on what people and participants believe. Just to mention something about the oath keepers, I was actually trying to find their actual oaths. I mean, they have a lot of statements of things that they stand for and things that they will not do and whatnot. But I couldn't quite see the actual, oathing statements, and perhaps it's, on purpose, I don't know. But I do want to just kind of mention that in this case, we see a relevant group now, or a group basically saying we are the oath keepers, and what I would say there is that from their perspective, they may think that they are, on the right side, that they're actually bringing forth in their mind justice or restoration and things like that. So one of the tricky things that I find, or maybe challenges with when we look at oath takers or who's taking the oath is, it really depends on their mindset of what they truly believe. And that's part of the power of that experience. They, in this case, say the oath keepers, truly believe that this is what they're doing and they stand for this and we're going to fight to the end. And we find this also in other communities like the Mungiki. So I hope that that helps a bit. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
I don't know whether there in Nigeria you're familiar with the Mungiki she's mentioning.
I think she's trying to incorporate the ethnic minorities, like you mentioned, in the old discourse. So perhaps we may shed some light on them so that we'll also have some education on this group.
Yeah. So Mungiki. Yeah.
Sure.
Let me, So Mungiki is a group actually, which is kind of predominantly Kikuyu again, and it is something that came up in the post-colonial period, and it's a group that has been trying. What I would say is they are a product of resentments over economic, and political disenfranchisement that has happened in the post-colonial period. And many of them, they're in their background, their parents or their grandparents, some of them participated in the Mau Mau rebellion. So they know about the oath. So from the families, right? Mm-hmm. So they've been trying to create a movement, a political movement, the aspirations or goals are not clearly defined, but they have been a menace in many ways, considered to be a menace in many ways.
Right.
Yeah. So
can I tell the story?
Go ahead. Yes.
Mike, I have to tell the story. Okay, I were doing hip hop interviews in Dandora, which is the slums of, you know where Dandora is, in Kenya. And we're just doing our business, and you can see up ahead over this like little maybe wall, a couple of guys just kind of keep looking and looking around, which is no problem. But the problem we had was finally one of my research assistants pulled me aside and said, we have a small issue. And I said, okay, yeah, what? He said, the Mungiki are here and they want some money for you to continue these interviews. So that was my run-in with the Mungiki. So this is what we did. We gave them a little bit of money. I don't know, maybe 2,000 shillings, okay? And I told the guys, I said, let's wrap it up because they're gonna spend that and they're gonna come back. We're in trouble. From now on, we have to do the interviews in town, in Nairobi. But yeah, artists in the Mungiki, it's like one group that became a little bit more radicalized. The other group, like the artists and the rappers, it's like they directed that energy to a different space, like that more artistic space, but they know each other and they understand, and at the same time they're all also kind of fighting a similar fight in terms of, hey, we want our land, we want, there's no position for them in the Kenyan society. I mean, they don't have jobs, they're underemployed, unemployed, and they're struggling. And these promises that their grandfathers, as you mentioned, and grandmothers fought to ensure for them, like in particular the land, was not fulfilled. So they kind of went into their own ways to try to make it happen, manifest it in more of a contemporary way. I brought them up or talk about them in the book a lot is because they used the foundation of the Mau Mau Oath and radicalized it even more. They made the rituals even more extreme and more provoking and whatnot, where it just, that's why a lot of people feel a certain way about the Mungiki and some of their actions and whatnot. So, and I think that we'll find that this might be in other places. I don't know about Nigeria, but you might have a group that's like that. Whether or not you know their oaths, I don't know, but there's some ways that they might bind and pull themselves together. So sorry about that, Mike. I just kind of interrupted you.
Yeah, that's good.
I just wanted to, this aside.
Yeah, there are some questions. From the audience. So let me read this for you, Mickey.
Okay.
I think you can see it, but let me read. I would like to ask if there are...
Where can I see them?
It's on the chart.
Oh, chat. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
sure.
The question is, I would like to ask if the oath takers considered the exercise as symbolism and solidarity building, or they attached non-physical, that is spiritual and metaphysical interpretations to it. Furthermore, was the perception of what was the perception of the non-members of the various groups regarding the oath? So it's two-part question.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that, actually. Yeah, it was, to answer the first part is that it was definitely based on a whole layer of symbolism. I'm trying to think if I have the time to even go through some of these things, but so part of what, and these symbols were based on a lot based on traditional belief systems and cultural practices. For example, what I found in the Kama community is that the number 7 had a lot of power to it. So what you will find are some of the rituals that they did were 7 times going around a tree or 7 times doing a certain act, things like that. And at the heart of it was the whole spiritual dimension. I mean, that was, at every moment you're invoked about this, was that it was powerful because the oaths a curse to them. So if you broke the oath, you ran into issues of either you dying or your whole family dying, or later generations encountering death for breaking this oath. And this was something that they've always felt, even like, again, in before 1900s or early oath traditions and whatnot. So at the core was always the spiritual component. And what they did was they used different acts, ritual acts, that helped them invoke that power, to engage in, you know, the spirits to unleash this. So let me just use an example, and I think this might help this first part of your question. Is for the Kamba, they had something called the Kifitu, and it was an object. So what they would do was actually beat this Kifitu object, and that was part of this process. But it was all spiritual, this whole connection. So I wanted to point that out, because there's a physical item, or in this case, object, and there's also these ritual acts that went to invoke the spirit or the curses associated with finding truth or justice and whatnot. So yes, definitely, to your question, the foundation of it all was the spiritual power, to invoke that, and to also keep these members united and focused on the purpose. And there was an element that people would say of fear, you know, that, you know, there was forced oaths in some cases when people took it, and now they're afraid to go back, and they were committed to these, the movement. So that part, that dimension is there also. And then in terms of the last question, or your second part of your question, the perception of non-members, there was different things that people said, and unfortunately, well, it's not necessarily unfortunate. They were viewed as, they were actually viewed as like radical, or I think in some cases, they portrayed them as thugs and terrorists and so on. However, I mean, just like any kind of revolution that we see, okay, we can even say in America, you know, some might say, they're radical, they're this and that, and this, you know, but at the same time, there are people that are quiet that understand the struggle and understand that particular act and movement. So it's kind of hard. It differs depending on, you know, the specific communities. And then there were some people that didn't understand any of these notions of oathing. I have to point that out. They just didn't have that in their culture. Traditionally, they just didn't know the practice of oathing. So that was something. Mike, I know we talked a little bit about these ceremonies, the traditions of oathing versus other communities, mostly in Western Kenya, that didn't necessarily have that exposure. So they may not have the same affinity to what these ritual acts were taking, what was happening during these acts. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that question.
Let me add something to what you've said. So the second part, the perception of non-members. So even within the groups that were like very much involved in the Mau Mau, you know, like the Kamba, Kikuyu, Meru, Embu, there were many people in those communities who are not part of the Mau Mau. So, and especially the members of the church, especially, that's right. And I say the church, have to be careful, because there were the Western churches, Western denominational churches, like the Anglicans, Catholics, Methodists, Presbyterians, and of course there was what is called the independent churches. The independent churches were involved in the Mau Mau. They were part and parcel of the Mau Mau. But the members of the traditional Western churches were anti-Mau Mau. And those people were really, really into the church, into the Western churches, were against the Mau Mau. They're the ones who became known as the Home Guards. They allied themselves with the British against the Mau Mau, and to them, this oath was evil. So they viewed it as, you know, the epitome of Satanism, right? Because Africans had been told by, by the missionaries, they had been told that your cultural practices are evil, so you should abandon them and, you know, turn to Christ. So those who were involved in the Mau Mau were viewed by members of those Western churches as being evil. And you know, there's a lot, actually there was a lot of friction, a lot of bloodshed, you know, was spilled between the members of the churches who allied themselves to the British against the Mau Mau. So actually, the actual fighting was actually not between Mau Mau and the Europeans, white people, but between Mau Mau and the allies of the British, African allies, who mostly were members of these colonial churches.
Yeah, that's an element. That's an element. Just like, you know, one of the things that also came out.
So, Amina,
one of the reasons I looked at the
also, well, I think Amina's was more of a comment.
Oh, okay.
So she's saying, this is my first time of hearing about this Mau Mau oath. I think it will be good to employ this system in Africa's political transition. Africans are more afraid of secret oaths than keeping promises. I agree. I agree.
I agree too. Yeah, that'll keep everybody straight. Oh gosh.
Yeah. If I could.
One of the things I wanted to point out on.
Okay, no, go on, please.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was going to mention just something small. The Kambas were actually, the Kamba people were actually viewed as loyalists. I mean, that's typically the role that if you look at the historiography, the Kamba were actually looked at as, you know, supporters or people that tend to support the British. So again, this story, the narrative that they were actually fighting also kind of speaks to the complexity of that movement, and also how there may be different interpretations, or, you know, you can be a loyalist, but you're not really a loyalist. You understand? Maybe you're just trying to get a paycheck or you're trying to work or whatnot. So I think that there's other things that we need to think about in terms of how different Kenyans perceived the oath and even the movement overall. Anyway, I think we need an article on that one too. Thank you, Philip.
Yeah, so I was just going to mention on the last comment, if we call it that, to also say that I think it shows the kind of challenge that we have with the criminal justice system, you know, in the country today, and the kind of judicial system, you know, that we're running, you know, embracing the Western ideals, thinking that when you go to, I don't think anybody in Nigeria will go to court, you know, on a neutral ground, thinking that there's going to be equity in that court. I don't know what obtains in other parts, but it's not like you're going to court to get justice. So I think that's the kind of point you're making. So, and it also spills over to what politicians do, you know, when they get into the chambers, and I think they saw with the Bible, and I don't know whether they use the Quran in Nigeria. I've not really explored that. I know that's been a very interesting topic in the US, which I don't think is not unconnected to what we're discussing, you know, to say the element. I think that's an oath, really, when you're assuming a political office and you're asked to, you know, swear by the Bible or the Quran, you know, what kind of symbolism do these objects have, really? So I think it's a very interesting one to see whether we can, you know, transmute from the current Bible, Quran model of oath taking to using our own traditional symbols. But that also has to touch on the kind of religious practices that, you know, obtains at the individual level and at the national level, you know. So it's really a very interesting and dynamic that I think
Dr. Philip, Philip, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. First, let me appreciate Drs. Costa and Mwenda I hope I'm pronouncing the names right. Please forgive me if I'm not. Mwenda Kithinji.
You got it right.
Okay. At first, I should apologize for turning in a bit late. We've had something of bad weather the past couple of days here on the East Coast. So we had a 2-hour delay for turning the kids to school. Instead of resuming at 7, they started school today at 9. So I made it back into the house just on time enough to catch the tail end of Dr. Costa's presentation and then on to yours, Dr. Kithinji. So I think it's an interesting thing to talk about. So I'm trying to leverage the parts of the conversation or the lecture that I was privileged to listen to after I joined. But the extrapolation I want to make, and for which I'm hoping you guys can elaborate a little more based on your research and study of this field, is that I think we treat with triviality the notion of Africans actually showing more difference, or if you will, giving more valence to our traditional oaths than we do to the religious oaths or cultural oaths that come from other parts of the world. So for example, the last comment about Africans keeping more to oaths than they will, keeping more to oaths than they will to promises. You know, I think it's something we should really consider, because with regard to Nigeria's political experience, we had a case some years ago. I would say would have been sometime between 2006 or 2008. It became a burning issue because we had politicians who, especially in the eastern part of the country, were compelled to subscribe to a shrine. You know, the name being Ogugu Okija. So the shrine itself was resident in Okija, which is a prominent city in the eastern part of the country, and the name of the shrine is Ogugu. So I think the Igbos would, I mean, it's fearful enough just by hearing the sound of the name. But the politicians were compelled, before even offering themselves up in the primaries or in the political process, to go with their political overlords, or what we call godfathers, to swear to an oath at the shrine. And we have pictures coming out from this shrine of politicians who were literally nothing but their underwear, you know, taking the oath and therefore swearing allegiance to the godfathers and to whoever else their benefactors were regarding their desire to contest for political office. So that being the case, then, if the oaths or that shrine was used in what I'll consider to be a more positive way, in other words, if they were compelled at those shrines not to commit any crimes, not to be corrupt, not to be dishonest, perhaps we would have politicians behaving, you know, resolving the agency problem for us and being better representatives of the people who put them in office. You see, so my fear is we kind of treat it with triviality, not acknowledging the true worth of these shrines and these African oaths and the way the kind of effect they have on us, you know, in shaping our behavior and our attitudes, generally speaking, and then specifically for political office holders. So if you'd have any comment on that. I know it was a long-winded way of just saying, I'd like you to relate what you found with the experience of having politicians actually go to shrines to swear oaths.
You know, I agree. I don't know, Mickey, let me mention, yes, let me mention.
You see, I agree too, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to just say that, you know, I mean, we understand the issues, the politics, and you know, and what's happening with our leaders, right? And I think even in the book, I even said that in the conclusion, I talk about, is it time for us to go to revisit our oaths, and how do we restore this notion of honor? Something is missing. There's a disconnect in terms of what is being pledged and how our leaders are moving. You know, I think is a great point. Now, how do we do it? How do we implement it? And those kind of things. I think that's the tricky part. But, you know, we can't deny that there's this, you know, these belief systems that are in place based on our own communities that hold a lot of power. And if this is what compels different leaders, then we have to figure out a way to speak to that particular energy.
Yeah.
Thanks for that comment.
Yeah, so, true. So actually in Kenya, there is something similar in many places to what you've explained. So like in my part of where I come from, there is a council of elders, a traditional council of elders. It's known as Njuri Ncheke. And they have, you know, there's a shrine of Njuri Ncheke. And if you want to become a politician, a successful politician, you must subscribe to, you know, to the shrine. And you know, if you don't, most probably you'll not go far. And now, the question though that I've been asking, I think we should, yes, I think the outside, you know, influences that have infiltrated us, religious, you know, culture, politics, in some ways, they seem to have also affected these traditional beliefs. So to me, in some cases, I wonder, for instance, these, you know, the managers of these people run these shrines, you know, it seems like they have become, also, in some ways, they have been corrupt. So they want to use that, their you know, spiritual, you know, that because they're in the hierarchy, spiritually they are up there. So they want to use that position, you know, as the overseers or whatever of the shrine to also make money out of it. Because in my case, what I see happening in the shrine I'm telling you about is that when they compel politicians to become members or subscribe in some way, they are making, politicians are paying them, right? So the same forces that have corrupted our courts seem also to have corrupted these, you know, cultural, religious, you know, organizations. I don't know. That's how I see it.
That's true.
Yeah, this is interesting. I think if I could just add, yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the point. This is not directly linked to the Okija issue, but I want to take us back to the Mungiki case. I hope I got the name right. And the group that is saying they are like radicalized and stuff. So I'm looking at that from a conflict perspective to say I think it validates the argument with the connections between poverty and you know, conflict, to say that when people are disenfranchised from what they consider their own natural rights, so it sort of stimulates some form of emotion that makes them, you know, embark on acts that may be to forcefully take back what they think belongs to them. So I think that is the point I don't also want to miss, which also touches on the corruption we have been talking about, to say that even in terms of loyalty, in terms of protection, in terms of struggles, it's always to take back what you feel some powers that have illegally, you know, seized from you. And so you look for other means when it comes to issues of survival, which I think is what the oath-taking platform, you know, presents to some people. Yeah.
Yeah. So Philip, there's something Mickey mentioned, which, as she was making her comments, but I thought it's important to emphasize it. I would like to use it in what I mentioned earlier, using oaths for the purposes of countering revolutions or maintaining the status quo. So in 1969, she mentioned it, in 1969, the political elites in Kenya administered this huge oath. There was an oath taking by then President. It was organized by people around the president, then President Kenyatta. And they did this because they felt that their position was being challenged by, by some, there was an opposition that was challenging their power. So what he did is they used now the same Mau Mau oath, but remember the Mau Mau oath was national, or cut across several ethnicities. In this case, they used it purposely by members of Kikuyu. So the members of the Kikuyu were sworn to protect the president. So this president was put in power by the entire nation. But now, when the opposition arises, now he was reduced to a tribal leader. And people are used sworn in, to protect him to death, right? So, and then later on, so you can see, in this case, it's being used for counter-revolutionary purposes, basically. Later on, the Mungeke, when it arises, the Mungeke arises to address the effects of political economic dispossession by mainly youthful members of the Kikuyu community. And this is later on during the era of President Moi, the second president who succeeded Kenyatta. Kenyatta died. And Moi went ahead to mess up the economy. He restricted the political space and things like those. And those youths from the Kikuyu, were very disenfranchised. He actually even started kind of ethnic, clashes, evicting, especially the Kikuyu people from some areas which Moi thought was supposed to be occupied by people of his ethnic group. So that's when Mungiki appeared to protect the interests of these young, dispossessed Kenyans. Now, fast forward to 2007, 2008. Kenya holds these elections, which were very contested. And then there's tribal clash, tribal, fights that erupt, especially between the Kikuyu and the Kalenjin, the people who used to be more, Moi's people. And, and who comes to protect the Kikuyu who are being slaughtered, who are being killed in the Kenyan Rift Valley region? It's the Mungiki, right? So, and the Mungiki, these young people, members of this, it's actually considered an illegal organization. They are used by the political elites of Kenya, led by, even somewhere in power today. They are used to fight to protect the interests of the Kikuyu, right? So Mungiki changed from being seen as an organization that is on the margins, that is actually illegal, and now it is legalized, not on paper. It's legalized, by the politicians. The politicians use it to fight members of those they view. They were, members of the opposing group. So, and then soon after the tribal clashes end, what happens is that the Mungiki is declared illegal again. And in fact, between 2009, after the post-election violence, between 2009 to around 2011, a lot of those Mungikis are killed by the very same people who use them to fight members of the opposing group. Now, today, Mungiki is being revived again in anticipation of the coming elections in 2022, which are likely to be very, which are likely to be very heatedly contested.
And COVID stuff too, or
yes.
vaccinations.
So, and of course, yes. So so there are all these dynamics that we need to look at also when you're looking at how the oath is being used and misused, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It changes.
Okay. I think
the narrative changes, and at some point they're heroes, another point they're thugs, another point.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think I think we need to wrap up so that
out of time.
Yeah. I think this discussion is something that we have to keep engaging on, and I'll just use this medium to thank both our author and discussant, Dr. Koska and Cindy, for the very educative, aspect of this oath, the power in the oath that you've discussed. And I'm really enjoying the fact that we are ending on the point of what I could call, if you permit me, the corruption of the process, or its vulnerability to manipulation. So you could use it for something that's positive. You can use it for something that is negative, depending on the interest. So there's an utilitarian value to oath taking and even the oath takers, as we have them at present. And I would like to use this medium to also introduce, I think I sent you the chart, but we're trying to expand this discussion better by coming out with a co-edited volume. The author is proposing that. And I think the working title for now is The Secret World of Oath, Time and Space, which I think explores what you are trying to talk about. So please watch out for our call. I think by the end of this month, we'll start circulating it, all around, and you could help us to also spread it to different networks so that we take this discussion further, reintegrate the discussion within the present context, and see how well we can advance the discourse there. I don't know whether there are last words from our both panelists before we just say our goodbyes.
I would be interested in knowing how the dynamics in Nigeria, because I'm sure there must be several parallels between what's going on in places like Kenya and what's going on in Nigeria. I'm sure
Okay, so if I could just say something that is a bit topical at the moment, which is not, I think, let me just capture it as basically something that has to do with the spiritual. So in Nigeria at the moment, we are having the rise in the space of violence by the headers. I don't know whether I have other farmer issues there as well, but it's something that is very topical across different parts of the country now. So I think, Mickey, you sent me a picture of cows recently in your somewhere. So we're having those, and there's a bit of an unrestricted freedom that these guys enjoy, these days. So within the southwest of Nigeria, precisely in Oyo State, there's been a bit of an accession of a persona that is called Sunday Igboho, who now took the challenge up to say all people of Fulani extraction should leave the ambience. So the Fulanis are usually from the north, and these are the east. But what I want to, the tie to the discussion is the fact that he is saying that he doesn't need the military, he doesn't need the government, he doesn't need anybody to protect his community. In fact, he's saying that he could win the Boko Haram war without any help from anybody, So that has to also do with the kind of pre-colonial concept of practice of perhaps spiritual powers that, spiritual claims, let me not use the past, spiritual claims to say that it could, conquer those stuff. And also, like I think Dr. Lawani mentioned earlier, in terms of politics, so there's a bit of a cultic aura around political practice in Nigeria, and I think it's very, very unique to Nigerians. So for you to belong in some caucuses, then you have to be like an out scholar. Of course, these are always shrouded in secrecy, but you know that people swear allegiance to some things which reflect in how they live their lives generally. So you see some people keeping to themselves, some people building homes and not staying in these homes. You see some of these isolated practices, some people wearing one particular type of clothes all through. So you see a guy wears the same style of white shirt anywhere he's going to, and it doesn't like change it. And this is like a very rich guy, you know, and you're wondering what has gone into his sources of wealth. And there have been a lot of videos as well, memes, you know, that reflect what people do for rituals, which I think also tie to money rituals, basically, to say people, I think there are memes of recent, new memes that showed guys, you know, taking maybe sucking life, drinking the blood of life power or stuff like that, you know, while they're in a bid to make more money or to enrich themselves. So there are interesting layers of things, which I think has a bit of universality when it comes to comparison to different clients as well.
Okay, right.
That's cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect.
So I think we can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much. We'll look forward to keeping up engagement and also having you. Yeah. Okay, everybody. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.